Well, my name's Pete Anderson, and I'm a business owner. I own Bodybuilders Construction, and it's a small construction company. We do remodels and small home builds. I was born and raised in Great Falls, and lived in Bozeman for a little while. Spent a lot of time on a ranch near Monarch, and over the last 6 years, I've made Great Falls my home again, and that's where I raise my family and do business. I did run last year for a House seat. I was unsuccessful, but that was my first foray into politics. And the closest relevant experience, I would say, is as a business owner. So I went to school at CMR, and also went to school in Belt for a while. And after high school, I got a degree in art history from Montana State Bozeman, which is interesting because that reveals sort of the duality to everything I do. I love art. I do art in my spare time, but I got into home building and remodel as sort of a way to make money, and then I soon found that that was where my true calling was as an occupation. So I try to balance things like work and play, and I do believe in a well-rounded experience that way. Well, as ill-conceived as it is, I think, for anyone to get into politics, it's not something that I set out to do, but was called to do. And everything kind of came together in a magical way. And it's not something I could have done if I hadn't started a family, started a business. But as you start to move up in the layers of Great Falls and meet people who are trying to make things happen, eventually someone might ask you, well, why don't you run for city commission? Why don't you run for legislature? And it was through those sort of peer-to-peer interactions that I was compelled to run. A big reason is because I don't see anyone else like me in politics, a 30-year-old, someone who's working class, in the middle of their career, and yet most of the decisions that are made on a political level affect someone like me maybe more than someone who already lived their life. They have a retirement, they're all set. It was explained to me by a local politician, George Nikolakakis, that the traditional way to get into politics is you start your family, you make your money, you retire, you get bored, you get into politics. And he thought it was crazy that I, right now with so much going on, would even attempt it. But I think it's important that young people know that they can. There's no rules stopping you. There's the establishment, and there's people that might hold you back. And people have told me many times not to run. It's not the right time. But I think even just by running, I'm setting an example for the next generation. My number one priority is the economy in Great Falls. And as far-reaching as that seems, I think you can break it down to several important factors. And I'm sure many commissioners have talked about it before, but housing, safety, and tourism, I think those three factors together are what build the Great Falls economy. And to tackle those individual issues, my experience as a home builder and as a remodeler, I have an inside knowledge of the costs for housing, and I think a lot of the current plans that have been made towards affordable housing are out of touch with the reality of the cost. So as a builder, I would advocate for remodels and ways to use what we already have to create more housing as opposed to building fresh. There's a time and a place for that, and Great Falls is building a lot more, but we do have a sizable amount of infrastructure that would be less expensive to upkeep versus to continue to build new. No one wants to talk about fireworks, but I've been to a couple meetings, and I've talked a lot, and it is one of those issues that has divided Great Falls, and I think that's why I went to the ballot, because it really is a 50-50 split. But from what I can see is we have a beautiful neighborhood council system, and when I was hearing the testimony of people for and against, it sounds like there were certain neighborhoods or maybe certain classes of home ownership that were more concerned than others. So I think an issue like fireworks, the city should allow the neighborhood councils, because they don't seem to do enough, and I've heard this from past neighborhood council members, but they used to decide a lot. They could at one point decide if they wanted to have a corner store in their neighborhood. So I think the city needs to give some power back to the neighborhood councils and allow each of them to decide whether or not they want fireworks. I think we'd see certain neighborhoods that have a higher percentage of home owner occupants that would maybe want to ban fireworks, but then other neighborhoods where maybe there's a higher level of renters or people that own multiple properties and so they're not sitting in their one nest egg. I don't think we should entirely give up fireworks because Great Falls is the last big city in Montana. Yeah, it kind of makes us seem like the New Orleans of Montana, a little bit of a Wild West, but I don't think we should give that up because once we do, we'll never get it back. And ultimately, I'm a capitalist, I'm a money guy, and having fireworks does contribute to the local economy in some way. Well, the city has already taken a lot of great steps, and they have an attitude that's totally different from when I first started my company in 2020. It was much more difficult to get permits. There seemed to be a lot of pushback, but now we have a project going on in Monarch, so that's county, but then we also have a downtown project that's receiving TIF funds as part of the deal. So very much city, county working together, and if the city continues to take that approach to local development, I think that's going to be the only way we get out of this housing crisis. And to define housing crisis, it's not that we don't have enough homes, it's that there's not enough available rentals at an affordable rate. As a business owner, a small business owner, many of my employees are housing insecure, and so I've struggled to just keep people able to work because there's nowhere for them to live. So I think we have to look at that section of the economy first, because how can you bring business, how can you grow Great Falls if the people that are working can't live anywhere? And that's how I'd approach it is, I guess, looking at the bottom level of the unhoused and taking it from there. Well, there's definitely a lot of local experts in public safety, and I think the fact that the city has put the fire chief into a city position as deputy city manager is a great step. And I don't claim to be the expert amongst candidates on public safety, but I do know the experts, and that would be people like Corey Reeves, Joe McKinney, people that have been in office before, and they've made it apparent that there's a desperate public safety need, but they've also made it apparent that the public doesn't want to pass another mill, or I don't think they've ever passed a safety mill or a safety levy. So we need to look at what's going on with Great Falls. Why is Great Falls sort of an afterthought? It's, if you go to Montana, you want to go to Missoula, Billings, Kalispell, and then Great Falls is where you get to live if you can't afford to stay there. So we need to change that attitude. And even with things like public safety, why is there not a fire training center in Great Falls? Why isn't Great Falls the home of the police academy? And we need to look at and answer those questions to attract more money essentially for public safety. If we can't get the money from taxes, we have to monetize the service. And what better way to do that than with a school? So I would look for ways that we could bring in more business-related activity as it goes with public safety. And if there was a way to create, I guess almost like a nationwide fire school in Great Falls that would give some of its profits to the fire stations, I'm interested in sort of growth, business-based incentives like that. Well, it's going to sound controversial, and I've thrown this idea back and forth, but I think that the homeless need their own community, and I don't think that it needs to be an institution. And I've joked around with friends before saying, you know, well, we have that island, why not create Homeless Island? And I'm not trying to be insensitive because I know that most of us are just 1 or 2 steps away from homelessness. But the fact of the matter is it's an always changing population, but it's an always present population. So there's people that might be homeless all their life, but then there's people that are homeless for periods of their life. And so you need to have a balance of where do these people go? And I don't think the answer is an institution. I think it's a community. And I think we have to look back to our roots as an agricultural state when we used to have poor farms. And what I would advocate for is a reuse of some of our parks and rec lands. And maybe there's a spot that we could create kind of like a homeless commune where people can live, they can pitch in whatever, it can be self-run. You know, the homeless people they're just people like you and I. I mean, there's managers among them, there's directors, I think they just need a place to go that's safe. But I think it could also be like anything else, a money-making opportunity. There could be a perpetual market, crafts. If it's a farm, they could have produce. So I think that instead of trying to figure out ways to get rid of the homeless or to unhomelessness the homeless, just find a way for them to live peaceably the way they are, and when they're ready to move on to another stage, or if they want to keep doing that forever, I think we need that option. I think Great Falls is growing at the exact right rate. I think if we grew too fast, we would make some major mistakes and we wouldn't be able to go back. One example would be living in Bozeman. I think they made a mistake of immediately filling in all of the farmland with subdivision and not pacing out their amenities. And I went to school initially for architecture. I had trouble with the math and physics class, so I went to art history. But our professor at the time was complaining about how Bozeman was growing so fast, they weren't planning ahead for the future, they were just knee-jerk reacting. So I think that with the knowledge that Great Falls is growing, we have to act like it's not and be very careful of how we expand. And I'm all about growth from the inside out. I think historically you've seen that areas like Detroit, they had an industry at the center of the city, and when that left, the centers caved. You had all this decay in the middle of the city, and then people kept building around it like a donut. And that's already happening with Great Falls. It's kind of a natural pace of development. But I think the city needs to be aware of this and prioritize the center of Great Falls so that we're actually growing from the core and we're not neglecting it and letting it fester. I think that there's some creative ways to approach that. And we could look at what the county is doing in terms of offering contractors a sweeter deal either with taxes or with land, but putting the burden on the contractor to install those utilities. And I think it's more of a problem in the county than it is in the city. But in terms of large infrastructure updates, I think there's ways that the city could foot the bill to the contractor in return for something else. For instance, if a large department store was going to come in, develop a lot, but they needed new sewage lines, they needed new electric service. I worked on plenty of projects before where the homeowner has to do that when they upgrade those services. So I think there's been a little bit of an attitude with Great Falls of begging for help from developers and giving them too much help. But with the rising costs of housing, Great Falls is becoming such an attractive place for development. I don't think the city needs to grant any favors, and some of these developers should foot the bill. Well, I just like to say that what sets me apart from any of the other candidates is that I'm not a politician, I'm just a regular person, and I was lucky enough to achieve the American dream in Great Falls, but I feel like the American dream is becoming unattainable for many of my friends and family and coworkers, and I want to do everything that I can to reverse that and let the next generation of 20 to 30 to 40-year-olds know, and I'm 30 years old by the way, that it is possible to achieve success and it is possible to follow your dreams, but we have to work together. Every step that I was taking, someone was holding my hand, bringing me upward. So that's what I'm here to do, just as an average Joe trying to get into politics, is level the playing field for the common man like myself.